My name is Ryan Bray, and welcome to Risk Management Professionals webinar series. Our producer, Justin, will be in the background, keeping us operational and taking questions. Today's topic, my screen still won't advance. Sorry.
Where do you do that? Go.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Bray, and welcome to Risk Management Professionals webinar series. Our producer, Justin, will be in the background, keeping us operational and taking questions. Today's discussion is about risk and resilience assessments required by the EPA and their anticipated requirements for water suppliers. But before we get started, this webinar series is part of RMP's ongoing outreach program. RMP's core competencies and expertise reside in the EPA's Risk Management Plan, OSHA's Process Safety Management, state accidental release programs, and SEM's program development. We have a niche for HAZOP studies as part of the process hazards analysis, and in addition, we provide specialty support for agencies, including hazard mitigation planning, emergency response and operations planning, different emergency training, urban water management planning, and the like. Today on our agenda, we're going to take a look at these risk and resilience assessments, at the regulatory background, at assessment and emergency planning requirements, third-party standards, certification deadlines depending on the size of your agency, and upcoming training opportunities. All right, jumping in, on October 23rd, 2018, America's Water Infrastructure Act, or the AWIA, was signed into law. This is coming because the government, Congress, has a requirement every 2 years. They need to take a look at infrastructure and make improvements. That's why the 115th Congress signed this law into act, trying to promote improvement with water infrastructure throughout the nation. Section 2013, entitled the Community Water System Risk and Resilience Act, amends the existing Section 1433 of the Safety Drinking Water Act, requiring and changing the language to require water providers to prepare risk and resilience assessments. This will apply to any system providing drinking water to a population of 3,300 or more. Something to take into account is that everything we're talking about today, they're projections, they're estimates of what we intend to see, but we don't know for certain. The EPA has not provided its final guidance document on how these risk and resilience assessments are to be carried out. However, according to the Act, the American Water Infrastructure Act, the EPA is required to provide that documentation no later than August 1st, 2019. The date of this recording, that's in 2 days' time. Anybody who has signed up for this recording, I will be looking for the EPA to drop that document. When they do, I will be providing a link to everybody who's on the list. So if you're watching for it, great. If not, I will provide you with that information, and that'll keep us up to date. So the purpose of this webinar today is to look at what we know so far, to kind of get the picture going. Things, as I said, that August 1st deadline is for the EPA is coming, and things are going to start moving pretty quickly. So if you're not up to speed yet, this is a summary that will get you up to speed, let you know what the issues are, and what to expect when the EPA drops that guidance document on August 1st. So again, regulatory requirements are in flux. We won't know exactly what's required until EPA provides its final guidance. So, risk, resilience, and assessments, what do we know? There's a few things that we do know will be required for the new assessments, and that is that we'll need to do a risk assessment. We'll need to look at the natural hazards and the potential for malevolent acts and assess the vulnerability of our agency to these types of hazards. We'll need to identify them and take a look at the frequency, the severity, the consequences, our vulnerability, to understand how vulnerable we are to these hazard events. In addition, there'll need to be an assessment of the resilience of all aspects of operation. This should include pipelines or any other conveyances that the system has, your water sources, treatment, storage, your automated systems, all of that. Everything that's included in your water system will need to be looked at to see how resilient it is to the different identified natural and malevolent act hazards. In addition, You'll need to complete an assessment of your monitoring practices. If you're using a SCADA system, that's great. We can look at the different vulnerabilities that the SCADA system has. If you're not using a SCADA system, you want to take a look at what you've got, see if there are any holes, if there are any vulnerabilities to somebody getting in, changing up your monitoring system, giving you false readings. See what's there, see if there are any holes. You'll need to assess the financial infrastructure of your agency. Do you have an emergency fund for a rainy day? If not, do we need to build one? Do we have mutual aid agreements? Are there insurance policies in place? What do we have so that if we do have an economic setback due to a hazardous event, what do we have? What resources do we have to bounce back quickly? In addition, you want to do an assessment of the use and storage of any chemicals. The EPA has their risk management plan. If you're using chlorine as one of their regulated chemicals, if you use it for treatment, you're probably already familiar with the risk management plan. But you also want to take into account first of all, that risk management plan would be a great place to start. You can pull information from it or even include it by reference in your assessment of how you're using and storing chemicals. If you're meeting that compliance, then compliance with that EPA standard, you're probably in a pretty good place. But if you have other chemicals that are not regulated, that are being used for lesser uses in smaller quantities, you kind of want to take a look at those as well. There might be surprising chemicals on site that can be used for human-caused events. So take a look at that, maybe storage of petroleum for trucks and things like that. So take a look at some of those smaller things, even if they're not regulated. And then you want to do an assessment of your operations and maintenance protocols. I want to make sure that you're using best industry standards for maintenance. Make sure that you have good SOPs, and you want to see if there's any place in there where those might be impacted by a hazardous event. Something that I found really interesting when I was going through the EPA's document, their draft announcement, was that it said that the assessment may include an evaluation of capital or operational needs. To me, this looks like a list of recommendations. We found that here's where we might be lacking, or here's places where we want to improve. Here's a list of recommendations to carry out to see that those improvements take place. Now, for me, in my opinion, I think the value of the risk and resilience assessment is decreased without this list of recommendations. I think it's necessary. In my opinion, I would include it. However, one argument for not including it, which is something I was thinking about as I was going through this, I already mentioned the risk management plan. And when you go through a process hazard analysis or compliance audit through that plan, there's a time limit on how long you have to fulfill all of your list of requirements. Until we have FEMA's final guidance and we know how they're going to feel about the recommendations that come out of a risk and resilience assessment, you might want to think about whether you're going to put the agency in a bind by overcommitting to some sort of mitigation action that you don't either have the funds or the workforce to implement. So that might be one reason to hold it out. Either way, I think it would be beneficial, even if you completed the risk and resilience assessment, created a separate list that wasn't included in the plan, just kept it to the side so that you can monitor what you're doing and the progress you're making to improving the resiliency of your water agency. So that's something to think about. Third-party standards. I thought this was also very interesting. The EPA said very clearly that there is no requirement to use any specific third-party standard for the risk and resilience assessment and development. There is no standard, there is no methodology in place to implement specific to risk and resilience assessments. This means that we can look outside the box. We can choose a methodology that's the complexity is correct for the size and complexity of your agency, simplified for smaller, simple systems, and made more complex for larger, more complex systems. In addition, I was thinking that if we didn't have a specific methodology to use, why not incorporate the information and methodologies from other plans that your agency probably already has in place? I was thinking through this, and the first one that came to mind was the hazard mitigation plan. If your agency has a hazard mitigation plan in place already, then you probably already have a team that has gone through and identified the different natural hazards, at least, that may impact your service area. In recent years, hazard mitigation plans have also included man-made hazards, including adversarial events. So you may already have information in place to look at malevolent attacks. So that's a great place to start. There's methodologies used by FEMA to sort of qualitatively figure out your vulnerability and the impact of different hazards on your assets. That may be a great place to start. It isn't sufficient to meet risk and resilience assessment requirements. It may not necessarily look at your maintenance and operation systems. It may not look at your financial infrastructure, but it's a great springboard and a place to start. I already mentioned your risk management plan, if you've got one. Specifically, the process hazard analysis section. If you're not familiar, process hazard analysis goes through for a system which utilizes an identified hazardous material. You go through and you look at all the way that that system might fail, and all the causes for why a system may fail at a certain place. That may already include natural hazards and human-caused events. So there may be some other things, including wear and tear, poor maintenance, things like that you may want to look at, or may already be included in your PHA. But even if it doesn't include some of these, you may look at this natural hazard may cause this failure, and this is what we've done. We may already have recommendations in place to correct this. It's a great way that you can borrow information. Another place is, of course, your existing emergency plan. We're going to get into a minute where we're going to talk about the requirements to update your emergency response plan. But if you have an existing plan, a lot of plans come with a situational awareness section where we look at the different hazards that can impact your service area, so that therefore you can create emergency procedures based on the identified hazards. So if you may already have language about how often and with what frequency and to what severity natural hazards and even these human-caused events may impact your agency. So you may not have to reinvent the wheel here. That's kind of what I'm getting at. The other thing I thought was the urban water management plan. Obviously, it's focused on drought and water shortage, but I feel like you could look at any of these hazards that may cause water shortage, and a lot of the information that you've already put into and the efforts you've already put into your your urban water management plan may apply to your risk and resilience assessment. Something that didn't make the list, but should, was the security vulnerability assessment. Many water agencies were developing these in the early 2000s following the September 11th attacks. If you've got that information stored, that's going to be a great place for you to start. If there haven't been many changes to your system, a lot of that original language may still apply. So that's some place to start to get the ball rolling. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are places to start. Okay, moving on. Looking at the emergency response plan update requirements. Now, according to the American Water Infrastructure Act, within 6 months of completing or certifying your risk and resilience assessment, the agency must certify its emergency response plan as necessary, as needed. And that was what was really cool. The first thing that needs to be done once you finish your risk and resilience assessment is not to run and update your response plan, but to assess whether or not it's needed. Your agency, maybe even through a lot of the plans that I've already discussed, may have already looked at the different natural hazards and man-made hazards that could impact your agency and may have already put them into your emergency response or emergency operations plans. If that's the case, you may not need to update your plan. It may already be compliant. And in that case, you can certify and be done without any further updates. However, when assessing your plan, I took a look at the US EPA's guidance for water systems. It was specific to small and medium-sized ones, but I was looking at their guidance for emergency plans to pull out anything I thought might be of value. What I saw initially was a lot of the same things that you would expect in an emergency plan. Some sort of situational awareness, an understanding of your system region-wide or service area-wide, and then making sure that you have a hierarchy in place. Who's going to manage an emergency? Who's going to manage an emergency? Who's going to lead operations? How are we going to divide up responsibilities? Also, you need to have specific emergency SOPs or different guidance for how to handle different emergencies depending on your company policies. Those are all very standard. If you have an emergency plan in place, it likely already includes that information. Some of the things that jumped out to me, though, is that it now requires that you incorporate the findings from your risk and resilience assessment. So if you have new findings or things that are different, new information that may need to be incorporated into your emergency response plan, that is the purpose of a lot of this. It also stipulated that your emergency response plan must be in compliance with the National Incident Management System, which is a governance for how, a standardized guidance document for how emergencies should be handled across the nation. Cities, counties, states, federal government are taking guidance from the National Incident Management System, which utilizes the Incident Command System. That's that standardized structure approach to emergency management. If you have questions about this or need more information, we have other webcasts and other trainings on it. You can go ahead and call me. We'll get you set up with some resources. But your response plan should be in compliance with NIMS and the Incident Command System. You also need to include secondary water sources. This is not something I see terribly often in the plans that I work on, but identifying if we have a water shortage or we need to reroute water, where is it going to come from? Do we have a secondary source? Let's include some language in our emergency response plan or reference where we can find it. And in addition, where can we find information about replacement equipment, chemical supplies, redundant materials that can be used for replacement quickly? Let's make sure we have some sort of language about where we can find information about that, either in the plan itself or where you can find it within your agency. Okay. Both the risk and resilience assessment and the emergency response plan must receive certification through the EPA. Now that said, the EPA is currently developing its certification process. They haven't decided how they want to do it yet. I don't know if that will be included in the August 1st guidance document that's provided. It's possible that it'll come later, since we won't be looking to have these done until first quarter of next year. Something I did find, though, during my research was that EPA guidance for the emergency response plan specifically includes a certification form that can be submitted to the EPA. So I don't know if the new requirement for risk and resilience assessments to include information and to include that information in your emergency response plan will change any of that process. But if for some reason there's a lack of guidance or you're looking for what to do, for your emergency response plan only, there is a certification form that you can submit to the EPA while you're looking for better guidance. So that's there for you. And if you want to know where that is or you need access to the EPA guidance, you can go ahead and email our company. I'll provide you with links where you can go ahead and find that. Next item is that both the risk and resilience assessment and the emergency response plan must be recertified every 5 years. So once the EPA receives your certification and it's approved, you start that clock. In 5 years' time, you'll need to recertify. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll need to update both of these plans. I think that what you'll find is, like with the emergency response plan, you'll just need to evaluate whether or not the assessment or the plan itself need to be updated. If there have been no changes in your vulnerability, there may not need to be any changes in your assessment or your emergency response plan. So what happens every 5 years, reassess, see if anything's changed, and then recertify. Now, that being said, changes in personnel, changes in technology, equipment's being replaced. To say that in 5 years your vulnerability won't change, I think we'll find that some minor changes will likely need to be made every 5 years. So keep that in the back of your mind. It may not mean a complete redo of this assessment every 5 years, but you're probably looking to make at least minor changes. All right, those certification deadlines, this depends on the size of your agency. For most of us, which are serve a population of greater than 100,000 people, this the soonest date, we're looking at March 31st, 2020, we need to certify those risk and resilience assessments. From 50,000 to serving a population of 99,999, December 31st, 2020, and then anything between that and above 3,300 people will be June 30th of 2021. Now you'll see in the far right column, I've included the last due dates for your emergency response plan certification. But there's something that needs to be said. The emergency response plan certification must be done 6 months from the date of the risk assessment certification. So if you complete your risk and resilience assessment early, your emergency response plan will be due earlier than the September 30th date that you see on your screen. However, if you were to certify on March 31st, you would have until the very last day, until September 30th. Everything must be done by that date. Something to keep in the back of your mind, if you're looking to strategize or you want to make sure that you give yourself sufficient time to update your emergency response plan, keep this in mind. If you finish your risk and resilience assessment, you might want to hold off. Give yourself a little bit, if it's done early, and certify it closer to the final due date, and give yourself time, that additional time, to work on your emergency response plan, if it's necessary. If you need that, that's some strategies you can think about. Something else to think about is that while there's nothing that says that you can't work on both at the same time, or at least provide considerations for the latter while you're doing the former. What I mean is that while you're going through identifying your vulnerabilities and discussing what sort of improvements need to be made, keep a list. If you're going to change your procedure, say, okay, this hazard is going to affect us in this way. We need to update our procedures to do this. Here's a note. Update your emergency response plan to include procedures for this. So that way, when you get to the end, your risk and resilience assessment is done. You've got a bullet-pointed list of the changes you need to make to your emergency response plan, and hopefully that can streamline the process and get the second done faster than it would be without that. So you don't have to do them separately. You can think about them both together. All right. As we said, the EPA is going to provide that guidance on the 1st. After that time, they're going to provide training on the information that's included in that guidance. The EPA is providing 2 free webinars. Thursday, August 22nd, 2019. I'm signed up for that one. And then Thursday, September 5th, they'll provide the same information again. If you'd like to sign up and you have trouble finding that location, again, go ahead and email the office, or you can follow the link that's at the bottom of this slide. That's where you'll find all the information we provided today and access to the training opportunities. In addition, the EPA is going to be providing in-person training for free. There's several classes beginning. The first is on September 11th of this year, going through November 15th of this year. Now with those, looking at the classes they have available, it looked like, and I didn't look at this too closely, but it looks like they're providing approximately 1 class per EPA region, although EPA Region 9 has 2. So take a look. If you're close to one of the locations to where they're going to be holding these in-person trainings, it might make a lot of sense for you to attend. Otherwise, I think that the webinars are a great value, no travel required, and you get access to the same information. Okay, if there are any questions today, you can go ahead and send those into our office. Any of the resources or any of the information that I've cited, if you'd like to see more or you have trouble finding it on the web, go ahead and contact our office, although a Google search of AWIA, or the American Water Infrastructure Act, Risk and Resilience Assessment, will take you to the site on the EPA website that gives you all of the information that I've provided. So that could be a quick search, but if you do have some questions or looking for more information, feel free to contact the office. I'll be happy to give you any information that I have. And again, I will be contacting everybody who signed up for this webinar. Once the EPA provides their final guidance, I will provide a link to you to keep you up to date on what's going on with risk and resilience assessments. All right, well, thank you so much. This concludes our presentation. I want to thank you for being part of risk management professionals' ongoing commitment to raising awareness and education in the community. Thanks so much. Have a good day.